This is a Hope 1032 podcast.
You do become refugees for multiple reasons, and everyone goes through that experience in a different way. But what they all have in common is the grit and the resilience and the resourcefulness that usually don't get talked about too much.
I'm Georgia, and welcome to Finding Hope, the podcast that finds the good in the midst of the bad. Each episode, we meet someone who's had a bit of a hard time but has found hope and healing along the way. And hopefully they inspire you to embrace the good in your world too. Episode 38. Shabnam Safa. When Afghanistan fell to the Taliban last year, Shabnam Safa watched on with more trepidation than most. Originally born in Afghanistan, Shabnam and her family fled to Pakistan when she was young, before emigrating to Australia when Shabnam was a teenager. In Australia, life wasn't easy for Shabnam, but as her story will soon prove, she is more than her hardships, more than the difficult journeys she's had to endure. Shabnam now spends her days trying to make a smoother road for refugees who come to Australia, including overseeing a brand new pilot program where communities have the chance to come alongside new refugee families settling in their hometown. Let's meet her. Shabnam Safa, thank you so much for joining me on the Finding Hope podcast today. It's such an honour to speak with you. Really excited.
Thank you, Georgia. I'm very excited to be here too.
Shabnam, first question that I ask everyone that comes on the pod is, how would you introduce yourself to a stranger? Who is Shabnam Safa?
Oh, that's a difficult question. Oh, gee, how would I introduce myself to a stranger? I usually don't like talking about myself a lot. I know that I do a lot of things, and so every time I do try to introduce myself, it can get a little complicated and confusing and overwhelming for the person in front of me. So it depends on who the stranger is, I suppose. But I'm a former refugee. I'm a refugee advocate. I, don't usually tell people I don't know when I became an advocate, but I am an advocate for lived experience, inclusion and leadership in refugee policy and programs and discourse, whether that's in Australia or anywhere else. And that's what drives me. I'm a community-minded person. I think about my own future in this new home that I have for myself in Australia and my community's future here, but also cherish and ground myself in the deep relations that I have with where I come from as well.
That's fantastic. Tell me a little bit about, because I know that you grew up in Pakistan, tell me a little bit about life in Pakistan.
Yeah, so my family and I, we were in Pakistan as refugees from Afghanistan. So most of my life before Australia, I spent in Pakistan. Grew up there as an Afghan refugee. Funnily enough, didn't know I was a refugee until I came to Australia, actually, until I was addressed as a refugee, or that title or label was given to me. So because the area or the city that I grew up in Pakistan is called Hazara Town, in a city called Quetta, which sort of sits on the border of Pakistan and Afghanistan. And as the name suggests, it's mostly populated by Hazara refugees from Afghanistan. So I grew up with people who were exactly like me, who looked like me, talked like me, dressed like me, spoke like me. And that was my world, my connection to the rest of the world was through television, or this was also when internet wasn't that big a thing. I, didn't use a computer until I came to Australia, so didn't have that window of connection to the rest of the world. So lived life as what I thought was a normal life. My parents were teachers. in Pakistan. They've taught for decades. My mum had a school before we came to Australia, where it was mostly catering to disadvantaged children. So she had school running at different shifts. There were some who had to work during the day to provide for their families and would come to school at night time. And sort of those are values and that they have instilled in me and what I grew up with before coming to Australia. It wasn't until I came to Australia and realized how different I was, or how different that life was for me. Yes, there was, now that I think back, I did come as a 15-year-old, so I didn't know too much about world affairs and politics and all of that. But I know that if I had stayed in Pakistan and if my family had stayed there wouldn't have been a future for me and my siblings. I did study, I did go to school, but when I had finished year 12 in that school, it would have meant nothing because it was never registered under the Pakistani government, or because it was, I was studying an Afghan curriculum, which essentially meant nothing in Pakistan. So I would have either had to stop studying or find ways to go to Afghanistan to continue my education. And I had friends who, took that journey, took that risk and never made it to Afghanistan. So I do consider myself very fortunate that our lives have taken the journey that it has, and I have come to Australia and I have built a life here for myself. But that also comes with a sense of responsibility, almost a moral obligation to do more, to give back, to raise my voice and raise awareness about people like me.
Let's talk about the journey first, from Pakistan to Australia, that transition. How difficult was that for you and your family?
Incredibly difficult. At the time, you don't think about it. You're focused on the next step. You just want to do the next part, and you go on doing what's asked of you or what's required. But looking back at it now, I came as a 14, 15-year-old with my family. I knew English because they knew our future was going to be somewhere where people spoke English. So they did invest in that. So they had made sure that I learned English before leaving Pakistan. The funny thing is I didn't know that there's a difference between English and Australian, and I didn't know Australian when I arrived here. I did not understand a single word for months. And that was another conversation with my parents, because they had obviously put a lot of funds into making sure I knew what I was doing, and I was of no use when I came here. But incredibly challenging to start a life from scratch in a country that you do not understand the systems of, you don't understand the language of, you don't understand the lifestyle, and just, even values and the way people go on about their daily lives, from small interactions to bigger, more important dilemmas. It was all difficult. It was, I sometimes say that it was a role reversal in our family, where at 14 or 15 years old, I became the parent of my family. And up until that point, my parents were obviously my go-to people. They were my Google. They were the ones I would go to with all my questions, from the day I remember. And all of a sudden that changed, and only because I could speak in the language of this country, not because I knew the things, but they started coming to me. All the questions were being referred to me. And so that, not just the responsibility on my shoulders as a child, essentially at the time, but also I saw what that did to my parents, right? And how it's now been almost 14 years that we've been in Australia, and their settlement journey looks very different to mine and my younger siblings. And it's not unique to our family, and I see that across the board. So, yes, it had its perks when I was at parent-teacher interviews and I was doing all the translations. But it also meant that I saw my parents being reduced to their inability to speak in English. And, they have decades of work experience in international NGOs and humanitarian development and teaching and multiple degrees between themselves. But that meant nothing in Australia. It's not the first time they have done that. It's not the first time they've uprooted their lives and started somewhere else from scratch. But I hope it's the last time they have had to do that. They've settled in Australia too, to some extent. We're all finding a happy medium here. But I think the point about making that, telling you that story, is that it has all changed in the last year as well, with Afghanistan once again going through the same crisis. It's the same thing that my parents went through, and it's the stories that I've heard, I've grown up with, and it's another generation going through that upheaval again, and another generation uprooted, and another generation that has been exiled and displaced and have to start life from scratch.
In mid-2021, US troops began pulling out of Afghanistan after 20 years of war. As they left, and as the Taliban overthrew the Afghan government and took control, its people were thrown into disarray. This audio clip was aired on the 11th of August 2021.
Absolutely harrowing tales of survival from these families who have fled fighting. Most of them came from the city of Kunduz, which was taken by the Taliban on Sunday. One woman, a teacher, told us that she left at such short notice she wasn't able to take anything other than her teaching certificate and the clothes on her back. She left with 8 of her grandchildren, and a day later her home had been bombed. We spoke to another woman who told some very disturbing stories about the Taliban. She said that the Taliban was targeting women who worked in government, and she also said that a friend of hers, a colleague, was killed. She also told us that families are being ordered by the Taliban to give them lists of the unmarried and widowed women in their households, so those women could then be married off to Taliban fighters. At this moment tonight, there's a battle ongoing for Mazar-e-Sharif, the biggest city in the north.
And that audio clip is courtesy of the CNBC.
I've seen, because of the work that I do, I've seen and connected with so many newly arrived refugees who are either evacuated or who have arrived from Afghanistan in the last year. And only now I'm realizing how triggering that is for me, just to see that experience unfold in someone else's life and go, oh my God, it was actually really difficult for us too. And all I want to do is just download all my knowledge and go, this is how you should do things and this is how you should not do things. But obviously everyone goes through a journey themselves, and they have to make their own mistakes and learn the way of life in their own way. But it isn't easy to pack up your bags, and sometimes you don't even get to pack up your bags and just go and plant roots and start from nothing in an entirely other world. For refugee communities, it's the grit and the resilience and the resourcefulness that usually don't get talked about too much, because we mostly focus on how difficult that journey must have been, because that's the part we can't relate. Everyday people can't relate to that part, so it's the most intriguing part. But I'd say it's just a part of somebody's journey. You do become refugees for multiple reasons, and everyone goes through that experience in a different way. But what they all have in common is that resilience, is that it's the attitude of just, taking it one step at a time and never stopping and continuously keep on going. And some thrive, absolutely thrive, when they arrive in another country and they're resettled and they finally have a sense of safety and security. And some also take that as a, sigh of relief that they finally have safety and security, and then maybe they don't have to work as hard anymore. And, everybody goes through that in their own pace.
An important reminder for all of us, I think. Shabnam said that she wanted to share her knowledge with other refugees, that she felt a moral responsibility to give back, to make the path easier for others who came after her. And that's exactly what she's done. Shabnam works at Community Refugee Sponsorship Australia, and they've just launched an exciting new program that allows communities to sponsor new refugee families coming into Australia.
The program is called Community Refugee Integration and Settlement Pilot. It's a mouthful, or CRISP for short. It's a small pilot at the moment for 4 years. It's intended to bring on, it's for 1,500 people for the next 4 years, although that was under the previous government. So that since then we've had an election, and there is a commitment from the current government that it is going to increase. So we're hoping that it's going to increase quite significantly. So very new in Australia, where our first families. Refugee families arrived under the program a couple of weeks ago, but it has a decades-long history in other parts of the world. Like Canada has 40-plus year history, and now it's taking on, the movement is taking on in other parts of the world as well. And Australia has joined the movement too, which essentially brings groups of everyday Australians together who want to do something practical to assist, to support refugees coming to come to Australia and start building their new life in Australia.
Great. So how exactly does this program work practically? So you've got families or refugees that come in from the airport or, and arrive in Australia, and this group of people essentially just rallies around them, provides them with practical tools. How does that work on day-to-day basis?
Yeah, great question. So groups of everyday Australians can get together, and that can be neighbours, family members, colleagues, people you probably don't even know, get together in groups of 5 or more members and form a group and say that we want to be part of the program, essentially sponsor a refugee household. The refugee households get referred into the program by the Australian government and through the UNHCR, the United Nations High Commission for Refugees, as people who are in need of resettlement. And they get matched with this community supporter group that we call them, and they start talking like friends, and these community supporter group are responsible for to support the refugee household for the first year of after their arrival in Australia. So welcoming them at the airport, providing temporary accommodation for them, helping them get set up in Australia. So the initial practical things could look like registering for Centrelink, getting a bank account, registering for Medicare, helping enroll children in school, helping adults, understand all the different systems and institutions in Australia and what their employment pathways could look like, and then supporting them achieve those settlement goals in employment or education, or getting driving licenses, getting English lessons. It's just all of those day-to-day initial practical needs of anyone who comes to Australia who would need, refugee or not. And it's it's having a group of community members as friends already there waiting for you to welcome you. And so you already, you start with that head start already. You don't start from scratch. And, communities rally together. They welcome a new family or a household, and it is beneficial for refugees in a way that they don't have to start from scratch. There is already a group of friends that they can call on. They can be guided by and supported by as they're starting and navigating what this life would look like for them in Australia. And for communities, it provides that opportunity to do something practical and meaningful at an individual level. Usually, people can get quite overwhelmed looking at the news or at, the sheer need of refugees, people displaced around the world right now. I think as of mid-2022, there are 100 million people forcibly displaced around the world. So it's very easy to look at that scale and feel overwhelmed and feel like you can't do anything. So this program is providing an opportunity to go, what can I actually do with what I have, the skills that I have, the resources that I already have, and the connections and networks that I have to make a difference in one person's life or in one family's life, because, that is still making a difference. So it's giving that sense of purpose.
And Shabnam's role in all this? Preparing the community as best as she can to welcome and nurture those families.
I've been working here for nearly 2 years now. I'm the community development training lead, which essentially means I put all the tools and resources together for community groups or groups of everyday Australians who put their hand up and say, I want to support refugees settle in my community near me. And then I make sure that they are prepared and supported and equipped enough to take on that role. And they go on and, do all the great things that they wanted to, because it's very much community-driven work. I see us at CRESA, or we call ourselves CRESA for short, CRSA. I see us as facilitators of that work. We make sure we put the framework in place. We give everyone the tools and resources they need. We give people the guidance that they would need to get started, and then it's the community driving that work.
Shabnam has big dreams for the CRISP program, hoping that it can help thousands of refugee families in the next few years.
I really hope that, 10, 20 years in the future, thousands of Australians can look back and go, I was involved in something so transformative and something that shaped the refugee narrative or changed the refugee narrative in Australia. And that they were involved in this growing global movement. So really hoping that it is a pilot, but really hoping that the pilot is successful, which I don't doubt it will, because everyone's putting a lot of heart and soul into it at all different levels. And that, we're able to demonstrate that this works in Australia as well. This is not just something Canadians do really well. We've got it too, and that it becomes a much bigger program and a permanent feature of the Australian refugee and humanitarian program, and that it sits in addition to government settled refugees, so it provides opportunities for resettlement to more refugees.
How would a program like this have helped you and your family 14 years ago?
Wow, I feel like everything would have been so much easier. It would have taken less time to figure out, less trial and error, but also a much bigger and stronger sense of belonging in this new home that I and my family found ourselves in. I'm not saying that we didn't obviously receive welcome or support. We did. There are other ways, and there are other programs and generosity of community members come through in different ways. But if I came to Australia as that 14-year-old at the time, with this new responsibility of being the parent of my family without knowing anything about life and the world in Australia, except for the language, which was also debatable at the time. If I came to a group of community members who said, welcome, we're here to help, we're here to answer questions, it would have absolutely transformed that journey for us. It would have instantly made us feel like we've made the right decision, we've landed in the right place, and this is where we're going to build home, because look at the connections that we already have. And, there were so many things that I learned the hard way. Finding employment, understanding education pathways, and realizing what I can and can't do. As an example, I started studying here in Year 9. And I was also getting to the age to start working legally, be able to work. And I wanted to help and support my family as much as possible, because I saw that they were struggling, obviously, with what we were, as we were getting established in Australia. And so I was constantly applying for jobs. Now, this was the time when jobs would be advertised on the newspaper. So every day I'd come back from school and I had all these highlighted contacts to call, and alongside calling the local fast food institutions, I had once applied to become a conveyancer, because I had read a role about a conveyancer and I had no idea what that was, but I knew that I'm a quick learner and I can do it. And I had sent in an application and they called me out of interest. They just to go, do you understand what you have applied for? They asked me how old I was. I said I'm 15 and I'm in Year 9. I can do it outside school hours and I'm a quick learner. I'll totally just give me some time and I'll make it work. And they loved the enthusiasm, but did tell me that you kind of need a degree and a license to do those things. I had somebody who just turned around and said, I feel like, we can find you more suitable opportunities to pursue. I wouldn't have had to go through all of that.
We've talked about your work, but you do a lot of volunteer work as well. Don't even want to say on the side, because I feel like it's central to who you are. Can you share a little bit about what you do in that space?
Yeah, I definitely don't think that it's a side hustle. I would rather, sometimes I prefer I didn't have to do the work that I do. But I currently lead the National Refugee-Led Advisory and Advocacy Group, NRAAG, NRAG for short, which is a national collective of former refugees, current refugees, or people seeking asylum in Australia, who are trying to elevate the voices of people with lived experience to be included at all decision-making tables that impact the lives of refugees and people seeking asylum in Australia. So whether that's, at a government level or at a civil society level, all these organizations doing great work with refugee communities out there, or, in the media or public discourse, to make sure that there is that perspective of lived experience in those conversations, because I and everyone else involved in this collective really believe that given the opportunities and the right resources and the right partnerships, people who are living through that reality are usually best placed to help design solutions that meet their needs. Now, I'm not saying that we want to do it all on our own. It's just a missing perspective at that level, which we're missing out on, and it needs to be included. And so we're working to, in partnership with a lot of organisations and governments and other partners and allies to figure out what that meaningful inclusion of lived experience looks like. That goes beyond the means of storytelling. Whilst obviously storytelling is super important, we've seen meaningful inclusion of lived experience of refugees being limited to just, can you come to our event and, talk about your story and what that journey was like for you, because our audience would really benefit from that. And there is definitely merit to that, but we need to go beyond that. We need to then start recognizing that experience as expertise, and combined with professional technical experience and skills and knowledge, recognize it in that rightful way and bring it to that decision-making process as another critical perspective that needs to be heard. So that's what we're trying to do at NRAC. In the last year and a month now, I've been part of the Action for Afghanistan National Campaign team, which was another collective effort that has been born out of sheer necessity to try and advocate for the rightful response to the crisis in Afghanistan, that what Australia can do and what Australia so far hasn't, given our deep involvement in Afghanistan over the last 20 years, what the magnitude of the response should have been like. And that's been a movement that has brought all different sectors and parts of Australia together, which has been overwhelming and heartwarming at the same time. And there's sort of connections through everything that I do. It's not like the work I do at Community Refugee Sponsorship Australia sits separate to those others. They're all intertwined and connected, and it's what drives me.
Shabnam, I have a question. Do you ever have time for yourself, number one? And if you do, how do you spend that time? How do you care for you?
It's a question I have asked myself a lot in the last 12 months at least, particularly around September, October last year, when I'd had I call it as the most difficult time of my life, because as I said earlier, when you are going through that journey of being a refugee or being displaced and you're in the midst of all of it, your focus is on survival. Your focus is on the next step and how to, get to where you need to go. But last year I experienced it as a spectator. I saw my people go through that exact same thing in a much bigger scale, obviously, and with that, it wasn't just the survivor's guilt that I was experiencing. It was also that sense of responsibility, going, well, I need to do whatever I can with whatever I have to make things better, because that's what. That was my calling. And it did get to a point where I absolutely forgot about myself and learned the hard way that you can't do anything with 2 or 4 other people unless you look after yourself. Burnt out advocacy is of no use to anybody. So I'm learning to take time for myself, to find a balance, because of the line of work that I'm in isn't something that I can switch off at 5 p.m. when I'm leaving work. It's not a 9 to 5 job. It's constant. It's 24/7. And I haven't gotten there yet, Georgia. Haven't found a happy balance, but trying more intentionally to put to have boundaries, to have separation, and to have time for myself. I usually at times like this before COVID would take it out at a gym or at the dojo. I used to do karate.
I read that actually. You're a black belt and you have international titles in karate. That's amazing.
I do, yeah. I don't train or practice as much anymore. I've had some other priorities come up in life. But yes, I did karate for about 10 years after coming to Australia. And I think it's been quite integral in shaping my journey and, helping me become who I am. I think that definitely needed that self-discipline, but also the confidence in my own abilities and what I can actually do. I surprise myself sometimes.
Thank you to Shabnam Safa for sharing her incredible story and the amazing work of the newly launched CRISP program here in Australia. To find out more about the program and how you can get involved in your community, you can visit refugeesponsorship.org.au, and that link is also in the show notes. And for more information about Shabnam's work with NRAG and Action for Afghanistan, you can visit the show notes as well. I'm Georgia, and thank you for listening to this episode of Finding Hope. I'd love to hear your feedback. You can send me an email, a review, or share it with your friends. Stories are always better when they're shared, and you never know what you can learn from another's journey. If you or someone you know has a story of hope to share and you'd like to be interviewed for the podcast, I'd love to hear from you. You can leave a comment on the Finding Hope page at hopepodcasts.com.au. For now, I'll leave you with this verse. For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. Matthew 25, verse 35. Catch you next time.
This is a Hope 1032 production. Thanks for listening.